I'm 87 now, and if there's one thing age has taught me, it's that time doesn't slow down just because you finally start understanding life. In fact, it does the opposite. It speeds up, it compresses, it slips through your fingers in ways that feel almost unfair. I remember being in my early 60s thinking I had finally reached a kind of stability. The kids were grown, my career had settled, my body still worked well enough, and I told myself I had time, plenty of time. That assumption, quiet, comfortable and completely wrong, is where I want to begin. Lesson number 1 is this. Time after 60 moves faster than anything you've experienced before, and if you don't pay attention, it will disappear without leaving you anything meaningful to hold on to. When you're young, everything feels stretched out. A year feels long, a decade feels like a lifetime. But somewhere in your 60s that changes. The years begin to blur together. You stop measuring time by milestones and start measuring it by losses, by changes, by the quiet realization that another season has passed and you don't quite remember how. I blinked and I was 70. I blinked again and I was sitting in a doctor's office hearing words I never thought I'd hear about my own body. And then suddenly I was 80, wondering how all those ordinary days slipped by so quickly. If I could go back, I wouldn't try to slow time. That's impossible. But I would pay closer attention. I would treat an ordinary Tuesday like it mattered, because it does. It all does. Lesson number 2, your body is not going to negotiate with you, and the work you don't do in your 60s will come back to collect in your 70s and 80s. I used to think I was doing fine because I wasn't sick. That was my standard. If nothing hurt too much and I could get through the day, I assumed I was healthy. But health isn't just the absence of pain. It's strength, balance, endurance, all the things you take for granted until they start slipping away. I remember being 63 and thinking nothing of climbing stairs or carrying heavy bags. And by my mid-70s, I noticed I was slowing down. By 80, I was planning my movements. That's the difference. You go from moving freely to moving carefully. And once that shift happens, it's incredibly hard to reverse. If I could sit down with the man I was at 62, I'd tell him to build strength like his future depends on it, because it does. Walk farther, lift more, stretch. Keep moving, not because you want to look young, but because one day you'll want to stand up without thinking about it. Lesson number 3 is one I learned the hard way. You need more friends than you think, and you need to keep making them even when it feels unnecessary. In my 60s, I had a small circle of people I trusted. We had history. We had shared decades together. I thought that was enough. What I didn't understand was that time doesn't move through a group all at once. It picks people off one by one. A heart attack here, an illness there, a fall that never quite heals. Before you know it, the circle gets smaller, quieter. Conversations that used to fill a room turn into memories you carry alone. I found myself in my late 70s realizing that many of the people who knew me best were gone. And it's a different kind of loneliness, one that family can't fully replace. Because no matter how much your children love you, they didn't know you when you were 35, when you were building your life, when you were becoming who you are. That shared past matters more than you realize. If I could do it again, I would keep expanding my world. I would say yes to more invitations. I would invest in new connections, even when I felt I already had enough. Lesson number 4, retirement doesn't give you a life. It reveals whether you built one. I spent decades working, providing, solving problems, being needed. My identity was tied to what I did every day. So when I stepped away from that structure, I expected relief. And at first there was some of that, but it didn't last. What replaced it was a quiet emptiness I wasn't prepared for. I woke up without a clear reason to get moving. I had time, but no direction. And that's a dangerous combination. It took me a while to understand that purpose isn't something you stumble into after retirement. It's something you have to build long before you get there. You need interests that don't depend on a paycheck. You need routines that aren't imposed on you by obligation. You need a sense of who you are when nobody is asking anything from you. Without that, retirement doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like drifting. And drifting, over time, turns into a kind of quiet despair that's hard to explain unless you've felt it. Lesson number 5 is perhaps the most painful one for me to admit. You have less real, healthy time with your spouse than you think, and most of it is already behind you by the time you realize it. When you've been married for decades, it's easy to assume there will always be more time, more conversations, more trips, more ordinary days together. You fall into routines, you postpone things, you tell yourself you'll get around to it. What you don't see is that the window for truly active shared experiences is smaller than it appears. There comes a point when energy fades, when health becomes unpredictable, when plans start revolving around limitations instead of possibilities. I remember the years when we could have done more, traveled farther, stayed out later, said yes more often, but we didn't, not because we didn't care, but because we thought we had time. And then one day, that assumption was gone. What remains now are the memories we did create, and the quiet awareness of the ones we didn't. If I could go back, I wouldn't wait for the right time. I'd understand that the right time is usually now, even when it's inconvenient, even when you're tired, even when life feels busy. And as I sit here now, looking back across all those decades, I can tell you this much with certainty. The things you delay in your 60s and 70s, don't wait patiently for you to return to them. They either fade or they disappear altogether. The body changes, the people change, the opportunities quietly close. What you're left with are the choices you made when you still had the chance to make them. And that's where the next lessons begin, because what I've told you so far is only part of the story. And that's where the next lessons begin, because what I've told you so far is only part of the story. The deeper truths, the ones that stay with you late at night when the house is quiet, come from the things you didn't say, the things you held on to, and the things you assumed would always be there. Lesson number 6 is this. Forgive sooner, because later may not come at all. I carried a grudge against someone I loved for years, longer than I care to admit now. At the time, it felt justified. I told myself I was standing on principle, that I was right, that the other person needed to make the first move. Pride can dress itself up as dignity if you let it, but what it really does is create distance, and over time, that distance hardens into something permanent. The man I refused to call passed away before we ever spoke again. Just like that, the argument ended, but not in the way I expected. There was no resolution, no apology, no closure, just silence. And that silence has a weight to it that doesn't go away. And if you're holding on to something like that right now, I want you to understand this clearly. Being right will never comfort you the way reconciliation will. Pick up the phone, say the words, even if it's awkward, even if it's incomplete, because once the opportunity is gone, it doesn't come back. Lesson number 7, your children don't need your advice nearly as much as they need your presence. This one took me a long time to understand, and I paid for that delay with distance I didn't see coming. When your kids are young, your role is to guide, correct, protect. You get used to being the one with answers. But when they grow up, that dynamic has to change, and if it doesn't, it creates tension. I spent years offering solutions when what they really wanted was understanding. I thought I was helping, but what they heard was doubt. Doubt in their decisions, in their ability to handle their own lives. It wasn't until later, when one of my children started pulling away, that I realized what I had been doing. So I learned, slowly and imperfectly, to listen without fixing, to sit without steering the conversation, to show up without trying to control the outcome. And something interesting happened when I did that. The relationship softened. It opened back up, not overnight, but gradually. If you're in your 60s or 70s, remember this. Your role now is not to shape their lives, but to stand beside them while they shape it themselves. Lesson number 8 is a quieter one, but no less important. Write things down, because your memory will not hold everything the way it once did. I used to pride myself on remembering details, names, dates, little stories from years ago. It felt like part of who I was. But age has a way of loosening your grip on those things. At first, it's small, misplacing a word, forgetting a date. Then it becomes larger gaps. Conversations you can't fully recall. Moments that slip away faster than they should. And what surprised me most wasn't just the forgetting, it was the realization that some memories disappear entirely, leaving no trace behind. That's when I started writing. Not because I wanted to be a writer, but because I didn't want to lose the pieces of my life that mattered. The stories of how we met, the way my father used to laugh, the small traditions that made our family what it is. If you think you'll remember it later, you might not. Write it down now. Preserve it, not just for others, but for yourself. Lesson number 9, you are going to be afraid, and courage is not the absence of that fear. It's the decision to keep going anyway. I was afraid of getting old long before I actually got old. Afraid of illness, of dependence, of losing the people I loved, of becoming a burden. I tried not to think about it like most people do, but life doesn't wait for you to feel ready. The things you fear have a way of arriving whether you've prepared for them or not. And when they did, I discovered something I wish I had understood earlier. Fear doesn't end you. It changes you, yes. It limits you in some ways, but it doesn't erase who you are. Even after loss, after illness, after all the adjustments you never wanted to make, there are still moments of meaning, small ones sometimes, but real. A conversation, a laugh, a quiet morning with a cup of coffee. Courage at this stage of life isn't about grand gestures. It's about continuing to show up for those moments, even when things look very different than you once imagined. Lesson number 10, and this is the one I hope stays with you long after this moment is over. Don't wait to live your life as if it matters, because it already does. We have this habit of postponing what's important. We tell ourselves we'll say the kind words later, take the trip later, make the call later, fix the relationship later. Later becomes a kind of illusion we lean on to make the present feel less urgent. But the truth is, later is not guaranteed. What you have is today. This moment, this ordinary stretch of time that doesn't look special on the surface but carries more weight than you realize. I've sat in rooms filled with memories, holding on to photographs of people who are no longer here, replaying conversations I wish I had handled differently. Not because my life was wasted, it wasn't, but because I can see now how many small opportunities I let pass by without fully stepping into them. At 87, you don't look back and measure your life by achievements or titles. You measure it by presence, by the moments you were truly there, paying attention, engaged, connected. You measure it by the people you loved and how clearly you let them feel that love. You measure it by the chances you took to experience something instead of postponing it for a more convenient time that never quite arrived. I still find joy, even now. It's different, quieter, but it's there. I enjoy a good conversation. I enjoy watching the light change in the afternoon. I enjoy hearing from my family, sitting with them, not needing to say much. Life doesn't end when it changes. It just asks you to meet it where you are. But I won't pretend I don't see the distance behind me more clearly than the road ahead. That's just the truth of this age. So, if you're listening to me somewhere in your 60s or 70s thinking you've got time to figure things out, I want you to hear this from someone who has already walked that road. You do have time, but not as much as you think. Enough to make changes, enough to repair what matters, enough to choose differently, but not enough to keep putting it off. Pay attention to your days, take care of your body, stay connected to people. Let go of pride when it stands between you and someone you love. Be present with your children, protect your memories, face your fears, and most of all, don't wait for a better moment to start living the life you already have. I've lived a long life, a good one in many ways, and if sharing these lessons helps even one person use their time a little more wisely, then sitting here and telling this story is worth it. Thank you for spending these minutes with me. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.